For USCFootball.com, I'm Keely Eure here with Shotgun Spratling for instant analysis of USC's Tuesday press conference with head coach Clay Helton, offensive coordinator Graham Harrell, and wide receiver Gary Bryant Jr. Shotgun, I'm going to start off with USC's offensive performance on Sunday. Now, there was a lot of excitement in the first half, the first quarter specifically, but then there was some drop off in the second half, and we specifically asked Clay Helton about the second half and what needs to change as far as finishing out games, playing a full 60 minutes. What do you have to say?
I mean, he said that basically their offenses had lulls, and he looked back at, previous games against Colorado, against UCLA last year, talked about how they've been up, and then suddenly, games are, back close together, and then they have to finish things off. And he said his takeaway from this week's game was that they all took turns, and by that he meant that everyone took turns messing up. It was different things. It was, it wasn't one person getting beat every single time. It wasn't one unit getting beat all the time. Everyone was messing up, and he said there was everything from the offensive line having physical beats or, missing, twist games and doing different things up front, not identifying the fronts a couple times. There were times when he said the quarterback, Keaton Slovis, had RPOs where he could have threw the ball out to the outside and took yards on the outside rather than running the ball. That their runners were getting tackled in one-on-one situations, which doesn't usually happen for USC's running backs. So he blamed everyone basically. And he's absolutely right. When rewatching the game, you see it, there's just something different every single time, especially in the run game. And we talked about that a lot with Clay Helton today and Graham Harrell a little bit. But it just was something that, it wasn't a consistent theme. And part of that was, Graham Harrell later explained, the offensive line did not practice together at all last week. He said that they did not have any of their starting offensive linemen outside forward at practice throughout the entire week. So that played a large part in it. And, hey, if we knew that, or if Clay Helton would have led with that maybe after the game, if you don't want to give away, that you're going to be without some offensive linemen, then if you lead with that after the game, I think that's, takes away the fire from people a little bit for how much the vitriol was for that they didn't run the ball, especially in the second half. So that played into it, but you still need to be able to run the ball better than 5 yards in a game. I brought it up on Tunnel Vision previously, but the Ohio State game, Ohio State has a similar situation with offensive linemen missing, and they were able to run for 322 yards against a better run defense. So they've got to clean that up. And something Helton said that they're definitely concerned about it, but they've got to keep their emotions up offensively and be into the game and not have those lulls. And he thinks that if they do those type of things, in the run game will get better as well.
Yeah, you got into it already, Shotgun, but there was a lot
My bad. I do that sometimes.
It's okay. There's a lot made about those 5 yards in USC's run game on Sunday. And like you said, COVID issues definitely played a part in that. USC, like Graham Harrell said, they didn't really practice at all. He said that they had to do 7-on-7 basically all week because they didn't really have an offensive line. They said Cortland Ford and Casey Collier were in their playpen. That's what they call it, the offensive line over on the side. And so how much does that work into what you look at this whole, what USC is able to do in its run game? Or do you say, hey, this is just another issue that you have to work through? Where do you see, how critical are you of this run performance on Sunday after knowing what you know now?
I think you're still critical of it because maybe you have to simplify things and just do straightforward blocking, and there were times when Washington State was bringing guys in the box and doing different things to try to slow USC down. That's why you got some of those man coverages early, is because they decided, hey, let's try to blitz that offensive line with some young guys playing and see if we can get through to Keaton Slovis. And there were some times, even in the first half where they were able to get some pressure, but Slovis was really, really good at identifying where it was coming from and being able to get rid of the ball. Not as much in the second half. They did some better things there. But I think you got to find ways to be able to run the ball. Even if you have backups in, you got to be able to trust those guys from fall camp. You talked about previously about being able to get those guys those reps and, at working their way up in case a situation like this occurs so that they would be ready. So those are the type things that you need to be able to do. You got to find a way to run it. You don't have to run the ball for 300 yards like Ohio State did, but you need to be able to run the ball for 3 or 4 yards a carry. It's something simple. Even if they didn't run the ball a ton in that game, if they did 10 or 15 carries and they got 40 or 50 yards, you wouldn't be talking about this. You say, oh, this is the reason why, but they need to be able to pick up some yards, just to keep the defense honest more or less as well. But they were able to throw the ball through the air. They were able to tear up the Washington State defense when they had the ball in the first half. Things broke down a little bit in the second half, and that goes back to having the full energy and being able to play for a full 60 minutes. And that's a concern with this USC offense. They've got to do a better job than that. I asked Graham Harrell about the lulls that they're having, and he said it's a little bit of everything. He's not real sure. When you get up early, there's going to be a little bit of letdown. But and I asked him, well, how do you fix that? How do you coach that up? He said you got to continually preach it. And one thing that stood out to me, he said, it's part of your culture. That's something USC's got to change. You can't have – your culture can't be, hey, let's look real good for 15 minutes or 30 minutes in a game. You got to be able to play 60 minutes on both sides of the ball. Defense is showing that they can do that. Offense needs to take that step forward.
Mm-hmm. On the whole, what did you take away from Graham Harrell's comments? I know we haven't talked to him in quite a bit. I know he was asked some questions about if he's concerned at all of inefficiencies within the offense, and he didn't seem concerned at all. He seems very much like trust the process and trust his scheme in that sense.
Yeah, he couldn't have been more disinterested at the beginning of this conference call. He was on his phone. He wasn't, he wasn't in tune with it. Maybe he's having a day like that, or he doesn't want to talk to the media. Maybe he doesn't like the media at all. Maybe he didn't want to talk about the run game. I wouldn't want to talk about the run game after that performance either. But he said when a quarterback goes 17 for 17, is doing things well, that's our level of concern. When he was asked about the level of concern about the run game. So he puts in if the quarterback's making throws and they're moving the ball, he's not going to be concerned about it at all. The problem is, what did the quarterback do after he went 17 for 17 in that first half, after missing the first throw? It wasn't as good in the second half. And that's the bigger issue to me than necessarily just saying, hey, the run game's got to get better. It's the offense needs to be more consistent for 60 minutes. If you run the ball a little bit or a lot, doesn't really matter if you're still moving the ball the entire time, and they didn't do that in the second half.
Mm-hmm. Now, we got a round of injury updates today, including 2 season injury updates. Greg Johnson tore his meniscus in the game and will be out. He requires surgery. I believe he's already had it. He posted a picture. Not sure. He will be getting it this week, if not. And then Jude Wolfe did break a bone in his foot and needs a pen, so he does require surgery as well. So those 2 guys will be out for the rest of the season. The season, although, is pretty short, so it's a relative term. And then Liam Jimmons sublexed his elbow, which means that he basically dislocated it. It's the same elbow that he dislocated last year against Arizona, so he's day-to-day. And then Raylan Goforth practiced on Monday, looks better, Clay Helton said, but that's still something to watch for there. Shotgun, obviously, we talked about USC's inside linebacker depth each week. Raylan Goforth, how critical is he to get him back this week?
I think it's important to get him back because we found out yesterday that Palaie Naitiote is in the transfer portal. Now, that doesn't mean he won't be allowed to play for USC. USC is still trying to get him to play. He's been going through the concussion protocol. They've got to be able to try to get him back healthy to have him back on the field. But does he want to play? That comes into question. Because sometimes guys enter transfer portal and they're done for the year. Sometimes they'll stick around with the team. Chase McGrath, who's entered the transfer portal, was on the sideline with USC on Sunday. So, it can go either way. So really important for USC to get Raylan Goforth back because – in this past game, you were able to use Talanoa Hufanga as a linebacker. And Clay Helton talked about that a little bit and said he's got that body where you can do some different things with him. But this was a package they put in fall camp for a team like a Washington State. That's going to be a spread team that's going to, that has 4 wide receivers on the field all the time. It's not something that is, viable for every game. So that's why it's important to get Raylan Goforth back. Chip Kelly will definitely attack downhill running the ball against USC with the Demetric Felton in the running game this week for UCLA. So you need to get your inside linebackers back and healthy. You're not going to be able to consistently put Talanoa in there as a linebacker. So getting Raylan Goforth is really big to get him back this week potentially would be a big piece added back because he played really well in that Utah game as well. And Liam Jimmons, I think that's an injury concern there because you are expected to get the other offensive linemen back. Clay Helton said they don't expect anyone to be out with COVID from previous week's testing and stuff. So those offensive linemen should return. However, you want to have all your starters in there. We saw some areas where those young freshmen get in there where they make some mistakes as well that contributed to some of those second half worries.
Hmm. Like you mentioned with Pallier, Clay Helton was asked about it, and he pretty much said, I always keep a supportive role when it comes to the NCAA transfer portal, and that's worked out for him. Look at Brew McCoy and Chris Steele, but he said he hopes to get Pallier back next semester. So as far as timing goes, that makes you think that he might be out for at least this regular season.
It's curious, the terminology. I mean, the phrasing he used there to talk about that. They said they're going to support him. They're going to try to give him as much information as possible about the decision. Will he be back? Will he won't? Obviously we were looking for big things out of Pallier and Itiote this year after all the talk in fall camp, and he struggled the first couple games. But I think all the linebackers struggled, and I thought if he would have been back on the field these last two games, I think you would have seen an uptick in play like you've seen from Raylan Goforth, like you've seen from Kanaya Malga. So I was really looking forward to seeing him back on the field and seeing what he could do. With a concussion, you never know exactly the time frame on it, but it makes you wonder if there's something else going on there. If it's just a transfer portal, if there's another injury, potentially those type of things, start crossing in your mind when you hear just the way that Clay Helton said that phrase.
You mentioned it already, Shotgun, but it is rivalry week. USC takes on UCLA this week. It also is important for the Pac-12 championship. If USC takes care of business, they will clinch the South Division. Helton did give a scouting report for UCLA. Shotgun, what's your take on the Bruins?
I mean, it comes down to Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback and what he can do in the run game of Demetri Felton. Those are the two key pieces on the offensive side. The defense is the much bigger question and much more interesting portion of the Bruins because they're a lot different than they were last year. Clay Helton talked about it. He said they're more aggressive. He said they're really living in the backfield. They've been attacking a lot, which will be an interesting matchup this week because Keaton Slovis, when he's been blitzed this season, has been really good throwing the ball. I think he's something like 25 to 33, maybe even a little bit better than that. He's just been tearing up teams when they try to bring extra blitzers. It's when defenses try to settle back and they're able to get pressure with 3 or 4 guys up front that is giving USC more trouble. So we'll see what kind of Chip Kelly and their defense tries to draw up. They know what's at stake here. And UCLA knows that they can knock USC out of the championship game. So that's what's going to be on their mind coming into this one. USC has an opportunity to not only lock up a Pac-12 championship berth, but to lock up hosting the Pac-12 championship because there is no neutral site this year. It's going to be at one of the campuses, and the fact that USC does not have a loss in multiple teams. Every team in the North has multiple losses or has at least one loss and could have multiple losses coming in. Then USC will host that game. So to have an opportunity to host a Pac-12 championship, that's got to be on USC's minds. That's something that doesn't happen anymore. So to be able to get on campus, even if there's not the fans and not the hoopla, would be really great for them to have that comfortability to be able to have the home field advantage. So I think they're going to be playing for that. But UCLA in a rivalry game, if you can't win a championship yourself, what's your favorite thing to do? Take out your rival and keep them from winning a championship. Just like Michigan and Ohio State, we'll see how that plays out this week. But it'll be interesting. It's a game of matchups, and especially with Chip Kelly. When they were able to beat USC a couple of years ago, it was because he found a matchup he really, really liked and was able to exploit it over and over and over. So we'll see if that's something that he can find against this USC defense.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty, that's going to wrap it up for USC's Tuesday press conference. For Shotgun Spratling, I'm Keely Eure. For more, check out uscfootball.com.